You also have to know how to be able to compare two decimals to find out which one's the bigger one, which one's the smaller one, or hey, are they equal? It's important to be able to do that, and sometimes it's easy. If the decimals you're looking at are both in the tenths place, it's easy to tell. If they're both in the hundredths or both in the thousandths, it's easy. The problem is when they're in different places. If you're comparing a decimal that's in the tenths place to one that's in the thousandths place, it's very easy to make a mistake. So it's important that you always convert your decimals to the same place value before you compare them. So let's work through a few examples with that. So here's our first one. We're going to work with 79 hundredths and 79 thousandths. At a quick glance, we see 79 in both of them, so you might be tempted to say they're equal, but they're not. You have to make them both same place value. So this one is 79 thousandths, that one's only hundredths, so we're going to add a 0. Like we learned when we were doing decimals before, zeros at the end don't really matter. So now it's easy to tell. 790 thousandths is definitely more than 79 thousandths. In our next example, we're comparing 4 tenths with 38 hundredths. 38 sounds bigger than 4, but we can't go with that yet because they're not the same place value. One of them is tenths and one of them is hundredths. So we need to add a 0 to the end. Now we have hundredths compared with hundredths, and we can see that 40 hundredths is bigger than 38 hundredths. So we put a greater than sign. In our next example, we see 6 and 30 hundredths, 63 and 0 tenths. Always look at the whole numbers. 63 is definitely bigger than 6. It doesn't even matter what comes after the decimal. If the whole numbers are different, you don't need to think any farther. 63 whole anythings is always going to be more than 6 of something. So we can just put a less than sign right there because 6 is less than 63. In our last example, we have 4 and 1 tenth, and we're comparing it to 4 and 10 hundredths. Again, we've got hundredths and tenths. We need to make them the same. So we're going to add a 0. That will give us 4 and 10 hundredths, 4 and 10 hundredths. They are equal. Sometimes you're going to be given a list of numbers, a list of decimals, and you're going to be asked to put them in order from least to greatest or greatest to least. Read it carefully. If it says least to greatest, you're starting with the smallest number. If it says greatest to least, you're starting with the biggest number. So read the instructions carefully. Here's a list of examples for us to practice with. We see that the first one is in the thousandths place, the hundredths place, the tenths place, and then back to the thousandths place. If you remember, what we were just saying is you really can't compare decimals unless they're all in the same place. So we need them all to be in the same place as the thousandths. So here we're going to add 2 zeros. That'll take us to the thousandths place. We'll add 1 0. That'll take us to the thousandths place. And our first and our last ones are already in the thousandths. At this point, it's pretty easy to tell which is the biggest and which is the smallest. They all start with 2 wholes. Then we have 131, 130, 300, and 113 thousandths. The smallest would be this one. So that would come first, 2.113. That would be the smallest out of the 3. And I'm going to draw a little line through it because we've used it. The next smallest would be here, 2.130. 2.130. 2 and 130 thousandths. Then we would go to the next one, 2 and 131 thousandths. And finally our biggest, 2 and 300 thousandths. Notice the whole numbers are all the same, and we compared using them all in the thousandths place. It's important to compare decimals that you always have them in the same place value. The last thing we're going to talk about today with decimals is addition and subtraction. The important thing with adding and subtracting decimals is that you always line up the decimals. That's the key point. I'm going to pause the video for a second and I'm going to copy a few problems down.